and welcome to Literary Prospects, where we talk to authors and literary professionals about books, publishing, and the writing life. I'm Kelley Vick. I'm the host of the program, and in just a moment, it will be my pleasure to introduce today's guest. But first, a reminder that if you like what you hear, please do take a moment to subscribe. It helps us out, and you can make sure you never miss an episode. Also, we've opened a Literary Prospects shop, so if you're looking for bookish shirts, totes, and gifts, please check that out at literaryprospects.etsy.com. And to grab books featured on the podcast and check out more curated book lists, you can visit the Literary Prospects bookstore on bookshop.org. And last, but certainly not least, if you're interested in extra content on querying and publishing that's only for our members, please consider joining the Literary Prospects Patreon at patreon.com/literary prospects. We'll leave all those links below in the show notes. And now, let's introduce today's guest. Brooke Lea Foster is an award-winning author and journalist whose articles have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post magazine, The Atlantic, the Boston Globe magazine, and People, among others. Her novels have been featured as top summer reads in People magazine, Entertainment Weekly, and Parade. An alumna of the Writing Institute at Sarah Lawrence College, Brooke is also the author of 3 nonfiction books and writes the popular newsletter, Dear Fiction. Her 4th novel, Our Last Vineyard Summer, is out now. Brooke Lea Foster, welcome back to Literary Prospects. You were on last summer to discuss all the summers in between, and it is a thrill to have you back to talk about your latest novel, Our Last Vineyard Summer.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. I also can't believe that feels like a blink that we were just talking, right?
I know.
So
I
quick.
know. I know. A whole summer ago, a whole year
Yeah.
ago. Some of the blurbs. Author Martha Hall Kelley says Brooke Lea Foster's Our Last Vineyard Summer has all my favorite book ingredients. Intriguing mother-daughter dynamics, a vivid Martha's Vineyard setting, a gripping dual timeline, and best of all, a family secret bombshell that I never saw coming. Author Joe Piazza says, evocative and rich, Foster depicts 2 generations of women who are stubborn and smart, vulnerable and competitive, but she does so with compassion and wit that makes you cheer them on until the end. Author Annabelle Moynihan says, both a generational mystery and a feminist coming of age, Our Last Vineyard Summer is an engrossing and poignant look at family in all its complicated depth. It had me gripped from the first page. And author Nancy Thayer says, a radiant, sun-flushed summer novel packed with beaches, secrets, and sisters. Foster has imbued this brilliant feminist beach read with skill and heart and optimism. This is historical fiction at its very best, as relevant as this morning's news, as enjoyable as a summer day at the beach.
I love that one.
I love that one too. So, with that, what can you tell us about Our Last Vineyard Summer? How do you describe this one?
So I would say Our Last Vineyard Summer is about sisters. So it's about 3 grown sisters who it's 1978 and it's a year after their father passed away, their United States Senator father. And their mother calls them to the family beach house in Martha's Vineyard. And they've lived very modestly. It might sound very fancy, but their house in Washington has always been a rental, and this is sort of a family inherited beach house. But their mother is sort of a Gloria Steinem, iconic like feminist figure in American politics, and she is grieving at the beach house in Martha's Vineyard and calls the 3 grown sisters home. And as they're packing up the house, they discover some secrets about their family that forces them to reckon with who their family really was, who their parents really were. And they also have some tensions in their own relationships that get worked through that summer. But it is dual historical timelines. So the other timeline is in 1965. So the 1978 timeline is through the youngest daughter, Betsy's point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And the 1965 timeline is through the matriarch of the family, Virgie, we call her. And it's through her point of view. And it's sort of the circumstances one summer that lead her to make the choice to sort of become this iconic Gloria Steinem-like figure. In part because the book was inspired by many things, two big things. One was a trip to Martha's Vineyard, where I was staying in the neighborhood where this novel takes place, which I can tell you about again later. But the other one is just the question, I sort of had, which is what would it be like to be one of three daughters growing up with a mother who was really a Gloria Steinem like feminist.
Yeah.
And this came to me in part because I'm a feminist and I'm raising a son. I have a 15-year-old son and a 10-year-old daughter. And the way I see the world is very naturally, I have a very empowered view of women and of a situation. And one day I started thinking, is this too much? Like, am I going to push my kids into the other direction where they're like, okay, mom, like we get it. Like, we
Yeah.
get that women see things this way, or we should. And so, as I contemplated being, the parenting style and things I was saying, it made me wonder, well, what if someone in the 70s, three daughters had that same kind of upbringing? Would they develop in opposition to it, or would they develop, trying to rise to the occasion and please their mom? And what I found as I started writing the novel is the sisters kind of splinter off and do a little of all of that. So,
You mentioned the neighborhood in which
yes.
this takes place. Do tell us more about it.
Okay, so I was staying in a house, and so we've been going to Martha's Vineyard for, I don't know, 20 years. We go for a couple weeks every summer. We don't own a house there, but we just look forward to the time with that my husband and I spend with our kids there. And we went there when we were single and we didn't even have kids. We used to go there. And we've stayed in all different parts of the island. So there's, a town called Oak Bluffs where they have more of a carousel and lots of ice cream shops, and it's very much directed toward the kids. And then, sometimes we stay up island in Chilmark, which is much more pastoral with farm stands. But this particular summer, we were staying in Edgartown, which is probably the toniest part of the island, town in the island. It doesn't look super fancy, but it's just everything's picture postcard perfect. So if I can, help you imagine white planked colonial homes, whaling homes, captain homes, perfect shutters, white picket fences, hydrangeas growing in neat rows along them, arbors with roses, and cobblestone streets. And I was on this particular trip, I brought my dog with me. So I was always getting up and walking through the neighborhood when it was really quiet and there weren't tons of tourists around. And as I would sort of do this loop where I would go down Summer Street and then go down to, isn't that just the best street, like Summer Street? I want to live on Summer Street all year round.
Don't we all?
Yes. But I would travel over to North Water Street, which has all of these colonial houses with the backyards on Edgartown Harbor. So when you come out of the back door of those homes, you can see sailboats bobbing in the water. You can see, people in a dinghy traveling in to go to dinner or breakfast. You can look out a little bit farther and see Chappaquiddick Island kind of curving in the distance with lights,
Mhm.
at twilight and even in the morning. And I started just on these walks thinking about the political connection to Martha's Vineyard, imagining some of the political families who had, summered in these beach houses in Edgartown. And in fact, we discovered the island when I was working as a journalist in Washington, D.C., and lots of my friends were going to the island for summer break,
Mhm.
summer vacation. And so as I was kind of picturing, this family, I started thinking, well, who is the mother? And then it became like, this feminist figure, and then who are the daughters? And I knew it would be three girls, three daughters. And I just was sort of playing around every morning and every evening when I was walking the dog with this idea of a book, but I didn't necessarily have a plot yet. But in the house that we were staying in, there was a sunroom that had, sisal rug and, like a rattan
Mhm.
coffee table, that kind of style. And on the wall, it had a huge framed antique map of Martha's Vineyard. And I, was staring at it one day and just looking at all the towns and the way they connect. And I saw that the name of the cartographer was Charles Whiting. And it was I mean, with writing, you know, Kelly, the strangest things will like elicit this huge imaginative response. And I just was like, oh my God, the father is Charlie Whiting. You know, he's definitely a United States Senator. These are the three girls. All these ideas that I've been playing with just solidified when I got that name. And it felt like that house in some way was speaking to me, even though the house we stayed in is not the house that I end up choosing for the book, but it just felt like this message. And I could really see the story at that point. It was like he was going to die, the house was going to need to be sold. And so that's sort of how all that came about.
That's cool. Have you had it happen like that before for your
Not with a
previous
name.
novels?
Yeah, not with a name, not where I just saw the name on a wall. No, I'm trying to think with no, because with the last one, it was on that trip to Maine I told you about last year.
Mm-hmm.
And then with Anjin Lane, that one came to me when I was reading about an old hotel and the way it had burned down in Chicago. And so
Mm-hmm.
that came from like a newspaper, snippet. But with my first novel, which was also set in Martha's Vineyard, that came from an advertisement of a specific house that the book ends up taking place in. So that one, I guess, is the closest because it was called The Swindle, the house, and I called it The Swindle in the novel. So, yeah, so I don't know. It's fascinating the way writers get ideas. Whenever I talk to writers, I'm always like, where did this idea come from? Because to me, the origin story of novels is the most fascinating thing.
Yes. Yeah. Speaking of origin stories, you dedicated this book to your parents.
I did. I did. And it's complicated with my parents because they divorced when I was 26. So there was no way a perfect marriage at the heart of my childhood.
Mm-hmm.
But the one thing about my family is that when I was born, my parents were young. They were very much in love for the first, decade of my life. I remember a very sparkly, happy childhood and marriage, because I got sort of their best years in their marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And my younger sister, who's 6 years younger, she sort of has a different view. We kind of have almost different takes on our family based on our birth order, because by the time she came along and she could remember, right? Like is,
Mm-hmm.
7, 8 years old, that's when my parents started fighting more and just not getting along, and kind of, even though they stayed together for the kids for a very long time, she sort of has this totally different view. But what my parents did give me as well is just, we lived on the beach. We lived on the Long Island Sound. We were on three houses back from a cliff in a little old summer community that was winterized at some point. And there was a 168 steps down to the beach. And I know that because I was a little kid who counted them every time I would go up and down with my dog. But it was this incredible childhood where I would go down to a private beach that was just for the houses on our street, and you could be the only one down there for hours. And I would, daydream down there, and I would, you know, think about the crushes I had on boys when I was in high school. I remember having my first kiss at my beach. Like so much of my life was set there. And even my husband, believe it or not, proposed to me down on that beach because he knew how
Oh,
important it was. It just, it had played such a role in my life. And so the love of nature, the love of summer, being able to relax, being taught what it looks like to read on a beach all day, the glorious first swim of summer, picnicking in the sand, all of these memories and all of these things were gifted to me, to my parents. And so even though they are no longer mom and dad living under the same roof, I really wanted to dedicate this particular story to them because it really is a story of family and the ways in which we, discover who we are with our in our homes and also outside of our homes, and then coming back and figuring out, if we can still fit into that family.
yeah.
So,
Your last novel was an exploration of female friendships.
mhm,
This one centers on familial relationships,
mhm.
mothers and daughters and sisters, very much so. What draws you to writing about female relationships in general, and in particular the family relationships for our last Vineyard Summer?
That's a great question. So I think part of it is that I have had numerous relationships in my life that have been very empowering to me,
Mm,
that have transformed me in some way, or made me who I am today. And so, for example, when I was in college, I met a woman named Georgia Sorensen, who was the director of the Academy of Leadership at University of Maryland College Park. And she was a leadership scholar. And I remember her, sitting with me when I was a young kid working a work study job and saying, what are your dreams? Like what do you think you want to do with your life? And it's really different than when your parents ask you that, when you have a
Mhm.
woman who's a scholar, who's, works with a Pulitzer Prize winning authors, and she was just this incredible person. And that relationship went on for many years where she really encouraged me and pushed me to go in different directions. And I always look back on that as being something so critical to my development and something I hope that my own daughter finds in her life
Mhm.
as she gets older. So I love exploring the ways in which women can really lift each other up because I think often in the workplace sometimes women complain women are competitive or trying to tear each other down, but there's so many great stories too where women really help each other. And in our Last Vineyard Summer, there's a friendship that develops between the mother, Virgie, and the mother of one of her little girl's friends, Pamela, who is an island woman. She has a lot less money and things than them, and she's really struggling in her life. And they really, it's symbiotic, the relationship, even though Virgie has so much. She, leans on Pamela and Pamela leans on her. And I really think that's what life feels like and looks like for women. I think we find support in surprising places. So that's that part of it. And as far as family goes, I just find families fascinating. I mean, probably because mine was so screwed up. I don't know. But I just think like when me and my sisters sit down to talk about our family, we really describe, like I hinted at earlier, different families. We describe different parents. We have a different outlook on the same exact moment that we all experience together. And that's why really wanted this book to have three sisters in it, because I do think that memory is a really fascinating element in a family. And there's this part in the book where Betsy sees a video of her mom teaching her how to ride a bike. And it really upsets her because she remembers her dad teaching her how to ride a bike. And she
Mhm.
doesn't even know why it matters so much, but to her, it really mattered that it was her dad. And her mom is like, wait a second, what about me? Like, I don't get any credit here.
Yeah.
But again, like, I remember those moments as a kid, blaming my mom for something that really my dad did, or it's just your outlook on it, right? And I became a mom, and that really changed the way I saw everything because everything I blame my mom for growing up, even in terms of my parents' divorce, I just saw it completely different. Like when my parents split up, I was 26, I was a grown woman, I had a job, I had my own apartment, and I remember feeling so guilty and embarrassed, crying in the bathroom that my parents were splitting up. And I remember thinking my mom was being so selfish and why would she do this at this age? And then I became a mom and it was like, oh my God, she was actually like searching for her own happiness. She was actually finally taking time
Mhm.
for herself because suddenly I was giving everything to my own kids and I knew what that felt like. And so all of that like give and take and looking at it from two sides, that all ends up in our Last Vineyard Summer. And so I think that's really where I get so interested in it.
We mentioned that Virgie, the mother, is this feminist icon, Gloria Steinem type character. What made you want to write about feminism in this particular time period of 1965, 1978?
So I think it's because there's such a dramatic leap. There's so many changes that happen in that interim, and it was interesting to look at the ways in which women in the from 1963 to like 1967 who were sort of becoming feminists, looking at where they are in 1978, right? And so you could have either gone the Virgie direction, which is you become very involved in feminism, and she's writing cover stories, and she's marching in Washington, and she's being interviewed on TV, and she's becoming the voice of the movement. Or you might have gone into the shadows somewhat, and maybe you started out feeling with those things, and then, being a mom and having kids kind of overshadowed some of those values and early political rebellions. So I like the idea of having, the first. I liked having a woman who's a mom who becomes this feminist, and at all costs, she will not let go of these values and wanting to make political change. And it's hurts her marriage, her relationship with her husband. He's a senator, back in 1965, he is alive and well in the United States Senate, and he's growing very frustrated with her opinions. His colleagues are getting annoyed because she has this column in the newspaper and she's making their wives talk about maybe change in their own homes. And she's really trying to stir things up, stir the pot. And I love that about her because I think it took great courage to do that back then. And it took even more courage to keep going, right? And to become that face and to keep writing when people were, maybe throwing something at you in the street when they didn't agree with you,
Hmm.
when the politics were nasty, similar to the way they are now. And so I really wanted to do that. I also, I don't want to say we're in trouble as women right now, but we're definitely it's an uncertain time.
Yeah.
And rights that we've assumed we would have for as long as I can remember are being taken away or questioned or debated in Washington. And I like the idea of sort of, getting at some of this tension and really showing people that it's okay to hold strong to your belief systems, even in tough times. And the edits were happening on this book when some of this was going on, and it's definitely was. I think this is a good moment for this book because I think
Yeah.
women can read this and feel like, there's been other times where we've had to kind of push through and really hold steady with our beliefs, and we can do that and still come out on top. So,
This is a dual timeline novel. You've written other dual timeline
yeah.
novels. What do you love from a craft standpoint about the dual timeline?
Okay, so first of all, I should say that writing the dual timeline is awful and it's so hard. And after I did it last time, I was like, I'll never do this again. And then I immediately started doing it again. So even though it's so challenging and really, really hard, the reason I did it again is because I do love being able to deepen the story. I think when I read novels in a dual timeline, I love seeing the characters at one point in their life and then seeing them at another point in their life. I think you get to know them so much better. You understand their motivations. You understand in the latter timeline why they say something to their sister that maybe happened when they were 12. You just can
Mhm.
you can play off of it as a writer, the entire time. And one of the ways that I had a lot of fun with that, in addition to all the sisterly drama and a lot of the resentments toward the mother and things that went on like that, was in the love story that kind of blossoms between the little boy on the island named James and Betsy, the youngest daughter. Because in 1965, they're pretty young. I think they're 12 or 13, or even 11 and 12. I can't remember off the top of my head because, sorry, my head is in the new book, but they're young and they have this really sweet friendship where they play all the time. And you can kind of tell that, there's like that little boy girl relationship where, they're not quite attracted to each other because they're so little, but they like each other a lot.
Mhm.
And that friendship does develop into romance later. And so, but then it cuts off when they're like 16. But in the later timeline, when Betsy comes back home and she runs into him in town, we really understand why those meetings between them carry so much weight for her because things between them ended poorly in 1960, in the earlier timelines that we see. It's not quite 1965, it's a little bit later, but there's, flashbacks and you get to see just how close they were, how their families were intertwined, what their mother was doing for the boy's mother. You get a hint as to why the father disapproved of the relationship because Charlie Whiting does disapprove of the relationship, and that's partly why they break up and don't see each other. And there's more meaning there then because I can show it in the two different timelines. So it's great fun. It's just so hard to write because the reason why it's hard to write is because you're writing two novels in half a book. So
Hmm.
each one is about half a book with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Every character needs an arc, the change that we see as we're reading. Each, book, each timeline needs its own plot. So you're doing it twice. So that's why it just is, I am like, oh, why do I keep doing this? But it really does enrich the reader's experience as they explore the book and read the book. So that's why I love it.
When you're writing, are you pinging back and forth or one timeline and then the other one? Or has it
Okay.
changed over time as the way that you approach it?
No. So basically what I do is I usually write th in this one, I can't say I usually, I'm trying to think. Actually, no, it was true with my last book. I wrote the present day sections first,
Okay.
in the meaning that I wrote the first three chapters. So, and that was just to get a sense even of I'm teaching myself who the characters are, what they care about, what might happen in those moments. And then I start to get a feel for why I need to go, what I'm going to show when I go back in time. Because until I sort of know a little bit of the later one, the latter timeline, I don't really know what I'm doing in the second one,
Hmm.
earlier one.
Hmm.
And so what I tend to do is at that once I get three chapters in the latter timeline, 1978, then I went back and wrote a few chapters in the 1965 timeline. And then I started ping-ponging back and forth. And things shift around quite a bit. This one I had three chapters and like three chapters of one timeline, three chapters of the next timeline, three chapters of one and three chapters. It was very tidy in that way. And my agent, when she read it, was like, "Why? You don't have to stick to the three chapters. Like, actually, it works better if we have less of Betsy in the beginning, go right into the mom in the earlier timeline." So if you notice, there's maybe two short chapters. No, there's one chapter about Betsy in the beginning, and then it goes right back in time for three chapters. But then
Hmm.
we go back for three chapters on Betsy. So we sort of played with it and moved it around. But in terms of writing, for some reason, the three chapters really helped me get the story down in the ping ponging. So I've really used that. But as we get later in the book, this was also edited. My agent was like, let's play around with go in and see if you can, as the action is picking up, towards the denouement, like let's make the chapters go one to one. So one timeline, one chapter
Hmm.
from one timeline, chapter from the other timeline, and ping pong it faster. And it was such a good insight because the book moves so much faster that way. When they go to Nantucket to discover some more things about this family secret they uncover in 1978, the sisters go, and right after that, or right before it, the mother is in Nantucket discovering some version of that same family secret. So they're back to
Hmm.
back, whereas before
Hmm.
there was chunks in the, like bookending both of those.
Hmm.
So when they're back to back, it's so much more powerful for the reader. So um, even if I write that way by the threes, I have to constantly remind myself I don't have to box myself in. There are no rules with novels. It's just as writers, we look for control wherever we can find it because it feels like such a all over the place experience to write a book.
This book is a page turner. Your
Oh,
other books have been page turners. What do you think it is that makes a story addictive in that way, makes the reader keep turning those pages?
so I think it's the same as when you write a journalistic article. It's curiosity. It's keeping the reader curious about not just the story, but the place, the characters, the time of year, showing them every little aspect, what they're eating, where they're going, how that's adding to plot, kind
Mhm.
of reconnecting everything. Um, but I also think it's the secrets. I think having a secret in a story gives the reader a natural progression to the end because you want to find out what really happened. And I love in books when the characters are talking about something that you don't know what it is as the reader. I love that experience of just
Mhm.
trying to
Mhm.
understand what they're saying and what they're talking about. And so I try to do that in this book too, where they're discovering little tidbits about the family, and you're wondering, well, how does that connect to what I just learned before that? Or
Mhm.
um, you can also, in historical, drop in little breadcrumbs that make it kind of historically interesting to read. Like in this book, I put in information about the first home pregnancy test because one of my characters takes a pregnancy test, and it's, the first one came out in stores and was on the market in 1978 when she's taking it, and it's the weirdest test. I mean, the idea that you would just pee on a stick and we all look at it 20 minutes later is a gift from the gods, because what they had to do back then was like pee in this little cube, and then like they add a solution, and they had to leave it for hours and hours and go back and use a mirror to see if there was a brown halo floating in it. I mean, fascinating, right? It was just so fascinating. So I love to put that kind of stuff in because, again, it's not making it a page turner, I guess, but it does keep you interested and curious, right, about these
Yeah.
people and what's going to happen next in their lives. So I think I try to write with some question marks, and I always try to write with a complexity of character where you're sort of figuring out where this character is going to go at the same time they are. So it's never a done deal. You don't really know what's going to happen completely at the end. You might guess, and that might keep you turning the pages, but you
Mhm.
don't really know. So,
Speaking of characters, you've said that you think it's really important that a reader can empathize with a character, even when they don't agree with all of their choices.
yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, and that was really true with my last book because a lot of, I knew my one character was very unlikable. So yes, and I think it's true in this book too, because with the mother in this book, not everyone who reads this book is going to agree with a lot of her choices. There were times where she put her kids second for her career to be first, and she gets accused of this even by her daughter at one point in this story. So I think just being able to be a mom and understand those tough choices and that we all have to make at times, and knowing that most of us put ourselves first, and knowing that the decisions that can go, the complicated emotional decisions that go into moments where we don't put ourselves first.
Mhm.
I think I tried to play up some of that in the earlier timeline, the mother's timeline, Virgie's timeline, because she really does struggle with her decision to go forward as much as she has in her career. And she even goes as far to tell her daughters, like, don't bother me from 12:30 to 4. I'm writing. I don't want to knock on the door. I don't want anyone to come in. And some women might judge that and say, that's bad parenting. Like, you should be out there with them, spending time with them. I mean, the version of parenting we have now is like, you should be in the backyard playing badminton, like at the park with them. Like, you should be with them at all times. And here's this mom in 1978, 65 and 78 being like, leave me alone. Like, I'm writing. But I think we can all empathize with her decision to want to write and want to write these articles and make lasting change, right? Like there's certain elements of it that you can agree with, even if you don't agree with her, politics. But I think empathy is just such an important tool in our lives. I tell my kids all the time, like, work hard in school, but really, I just want you to be, empathetic and kind to others around you, because until we take a minute and consider what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes, we don't really have any wisdom in this life. You have to take a minute. I even say it, and my kids are like, Mom, that's crazy. But like, I even say when someone's rude, right? You get so annoyed if someone cuts you off or someone's rude in the store. But I always say, you don't know what happened 5 minutes before you stepped up to that counter or you made the left turn, and that person
Yeah.
honked at you. People, we all have stuff, we all have baggage, and it goes with us every day from place to place. And sometimes we're better than other times at kind of tamping it down. So I love to write those types of characters in a way where people can see maybe the negative side of the character, but also see the way they're struggling and they're trying. And that comes from, I think, watching my parents, honestly. My parents were people who, they fought a lot when I was older, when I was a teenager. They would, say terrible things to one another. But then I would look at them and be like, but they're hurt, like you could just
Mhm.
see the ways in which, if you considered, my dad who would put aside his music career to make a living to support his family, and my mom who, wanted to be a writer and then ended up working as a beautician, and then later going into real estate. So people put things aside and they grow resentful and angry and they blame each other. And just
Mhm.
watching that play out in my household, I think made me very interested in character and empathy and the way we all see one another and what we can learn from each other, just kind of taking a moment to consider someone else's experience.
Our Last Vineyard Summer is your fourth novel. We talked about just a year ago you were here with your third, All the Summers in Between. That's a pretty quick clip, a book a year.
Yes.
What is your process like? And has that changed over time?
Yes, it has. So, okay, so the reason, so this one came out so fast because I had a two book deal with the last
Mhm.
book. So they wanted this one right after. And they would love for me to have one out next summer too. But I think in writing two books so close together, I can do it. I could write another one and have it out next year, but it's really exhausting. And it's
Mhm.
really, really something that I don't think is tenable for a mom of young kids. So I have decided so next summer you will not see me, but you will see me the summer after that because I'm taking a
Look
little more
forward.
time. But my process is that I start with that idea I talked about, when I was on the vineyard and I had the idea for the family. And then I don't outline. I do like when I'm on the beach and daydreaming my ideas up and I'm kind of, working in that way, working like coming up with a story. I do sort of write down, try to think of the right names for the characters. I kind of will scribble down parts of the story, maybe a scene setting that I think would be good. So I kind of work in quiet ways
Mhm.
before I even sit down to write. But I don't sit at my desk and do those things. Once I'm sitting down at my desk with the computer, I am writing. So what I do is I literally just free write. And I think that most people would be horrified by that, but I think a lot of writers, this is how we work. It's just for some, my agent always says I'm a writer that finds my story through discovery, and it's really true. Like if I sit down, I've actually tried with Anjin Lane, I sat down and I outlined the whole story.
Mhm.
And then this happens, and then this happens. And none of it made it in the book, like maybe like the first like two chapters. And then because once I start writing, different voices come, different characters pop up, different themes. And I realize kind of what I'm doing as I'm going. And so it's very inefficient, but it's also really gives you these amazing gifts at times. Like there's this one moment in the book where the two sisters are sort of having this makeup session and they're lying in this hotel room bed talking face to face and and one of them is like says something. I'm just going to tell you guys, but she says she looks at her sister and she goes, "I'm pregnant," and the sister says, "I know." And that was something that came to me as I was literally writing the scene. I didn't plan on her telling her sister at that moment. But to me, that's the magic of writing. That's why I love to write because I love being in a scene and just sort of typing. And every once in a while, you get this moment where I literally lifted my hands from the keys and started laughing because I was like, of course that's what happened. Like, of course, like it just, but it was just like this little sliver of magic that makes up
Mhm.
for all the days of horrific work that like you're sitting there and nothing's happening. But when that happens, I just love it. So yeah, I do a lot of that. So I just kind of free write. Then I go back in and I print it out on paper and I read it all on paper with a pen, sort of like I'm back in my editor days, because I can see things in the rhythm or the story. I can see holes. I can see where a character's not coming through. And then I kind of just sit and revise it again and again until I send it out to someone. But that's really it's messy. Like I have a friend who wants to write a novel and she's a former journalist. And when I told her this, she was like, this makes no sense. Like, what do you just end up cutting so much of what you write? And I'm like, I don't know. It just works for me. Like, I don't have a bunch of tons of notes like I did in an article for a newspaper where you know exactly where the story has to go. Like that's the beauty of fiction is you have the freedom to bring it in all these unexpected places. And I love those surprises.
Yeah. You have said that with each of your previous novels, I don't know about this one, that there has been a point at which you have wanted to give up.
Hmm.
How have you gotten through those moments of self-doubt?
Oh, goodness. I love this question, but I also like hate this question because it's hard to answer. Okay, so yes, with this book, I remember feeling that way in part because of the dual POV, the dual point of view, and also the dual timeline. It was just becoming so hard to track the sisters in both timelines. And okay, I did feel like I wanted to give up. And how did I get through it? I think what I did is I just kept working. And that's what I do every time. I just keep writing. So I'll feel like I will write my way out of it at some point. Sometimes what I do is I will leave whatever section, say I'm at the midpoint of the book, which is always awful. It's just like as authors, we are like it's slogging through at that point. I might stop and write a scene I know has to happen 4 chapters away just to get there. I might take because it's the dual timeline, I might take all the 1965s and put them in sections and put them in one Word doc and put all the 1978s in another and just kind of work as if I'm only working on one book for a while. Um,
Mhm.
I just sort of work through it, but I also think that there's a little inner flame that burns inside of me that always kind of says, "You're a writer. This is hard. You're going to get it
Mhm.
done." And I return to that voice, that light, that glow repeatedly because I think if you didn't, you really would walk away
Mhm.
because it is so hard and you really are in the dark with a flashlight trying to find your way. So, yeah, I would say I really rely on that inner little teeny bit of confidence that developed over many years of being a journalist and knowing that I can get through an article, I can get through a revision, I can get through a tough moment. It builds resilience. And I think, I really lean on that in those moments.
You write letters to yourself. Well, is that right?
Yes, I was at a retreat and they encouraged us to write a letter to ourselves telling us like what you want to remember about what you were feeling so good at in this particular writer's retreat. And,
Mm.
we're always so hard on ourselves as writers. We tell ourselves like awful things about our writing and we compare ourselves to other writers who are doing, commercially better or getting more attention. And, this particular letter, I don't have it in front of me, so I don't remember exactly what it says, but it said something like, you can keep doing this. Like, I love you, like, you're okay, like, you can be a writer. And it was just really, a little lift of support that I felt like when I received it 2 months later was actually such a gift. And so I encourage everyone to write themselves letters. It doesn't have to be about being a writer. It can be about being a mom or a sister or just remembering a memory that you want to surprise yourself with. But having someone drop it in the mail, because someone dropped it in the mail to me without me even remembering I ever wrote it, it really was so
That's
special.
cool.
Yeah, it was really cool.
You write a very popular Substack called Dear Fiction. Can you talk about that a little bit and what made you decide to start this newsletter?
Sure. Yeah. So I started it, I think, maybe a little over 2 years ago. I did it in part because all my journalist friends were starting Substacks and they were like, you need to start one. And I figured, you know what, maybe I'll do it. And part of that is because in the novel writing process, there's huge chunks of time where you are in your novel, and then there's huge chunks of time where it's in the editor's hands. And
Hmm.
you don't have the bandwidth to start anything new at that point because you know it's going to come back to you for revisions and you know you're going to have to get back into it in like 6 weeks. But I'll have these chunks of time where I would just be like going crazy, honestly, because I'm someone that needs to be working at all times. Um,
Hmm.
and so the Substack for me became this amazing outlet where I can, you know, do some of the journalistic essays that I did. I can report, I can interview other authors and learn from other authors in that way. But yeah, it's just this fun kind of way to take back some of that journalistic side of myself. And so I've done a little bit of everything on it, trying to figure out, like all of us, what works and what doesn't. But by far my favorite part of it is when I did a book club at one point, but I love doing the author confessions where I interview authors because I love to ask the questions I would die to ask at a cocktail party, like, has publishing ever made you cry? Like, what has been the
Hmm.
hardest moment that you've experienced as a writer? Do you have any novels in a drawer that you might come back to someday? And then, the question I said earlier, the origin story of the idea. So it
Yeah.
gives me a chance to kind of go to some of my writer friends or acquaintances or even people I've never met and ask some of these things I'm really, really curious about. And the answers are just, I mean, because you do this all the time too, but the answers are fascinating, right? It's
Yeah.
just, I love talking and learning from other people. I mean, honestly, that's the part of being a journalist I miss so much is just talking to people and listening to them. And listening is an art. It's really hard for people to sit and listen these days, especially in conversation. They tend to be thinking about what they're going to say next as you're talking.
Yeah.
Um, and so I love just being able to actually report and talk to people again.
Has publishing ever made you cry?
I knew you were going to ask me that. It's so funny. As a journalist, I was like, I shouldn't have said that because now she's going to say she has to ask me the follow-up. Like, I knew it.
You know I have to.
Okay, so it has, and it's the silliest thing when I explain why, but maybe you guys will understand. I don't know. There's so much ego in writing, and you put yourself out there so much. And last summer, I was on tour for all the summers in between,
Mhm.
and I was having really good events, really nice crowds, and my novel was set in East Hampton, out on Eastern Long Island in the Hamptons. And I had a book event at Bookhampton, right on Main
Mhm.
Street in East Hampton. And there are parts of my book that literally happen on the sidewalk in front of Bookhampton. So I was so nervous about this event because I had this vision of people, old timers in East Hampton, raising their hand and saying, like, this didn't happen in this year. And I just was like, oh my God, I got to be on my toes. So I like re-looked at all of my facts from out there. And I was like ready to talk all about the Hamptons and historically what went on there. And I got to the event. I did my hair. I've got a nice dress on. I like drive 2 hours to get to the event, and I get there, and there's like 30 chairs set up, and we're inching closer to the opening time, and there's two people there, and one is my mom's friend from childhood, and the other one is someone I didn't know, but she wasn't even really there for the book event. She just kind of was there and sat down. I mean, it was brutal. And it was really, it took me down like 10 notches because here I am preparing for this event, thinking I'm gonna have people questioning me, and
Yeah.
no one even showed up. So it was like, oh my God, like no one cares about me, no one cares about my book. As an author, you immediately make this leap. And so I remember I had to do the talk. I had to do the talk like there were 30 people there. So I did my talk and I got in the car and I was just like, "Woo." And it was just, I don't know, it's embarrassing to admit it, but I think it was like, it was the setting of the book and it was the Hamptons and no one came. So it was brutal. It was really brutal. So yeah, that was definitely a moment that made me cry.
Thank you very much for sharing that though, because I feel like all that's like a thing with authors and everybody has that happen, and it's like I've heard so many people talk about planning for when that happens and what to do and like
Oh, that's such a good idea. I wish I had planned. I did text like my author group last year. We had this June 4th author crew. And so we'd all come out with books on June 4th. And I texted
Mhm.
them and told them what happened. And everybody's like, been there, been there, been there. So it did make me feel better, but it didn't stop the tears because it was just like all the preparation and it became this waste of time. And my family was out without me at this nice dinner. And, it was just like, oh, but it happens. Now I know it happens and I can prepare myself for it.
Normally at this point, I ask what you wish you had known before publishing your first book, but we've talked about that
Yes.
in your first interview. So I'm wondering if now that you're on your fourth, if there's something new that you wish you had known about publishing.
Question. Let me think. I guess I just had no idea how emotional of a journey it was going to be, to be honest. I
Yeah.
didn't realize, being a journalist and having articles come out and having someone write in because they disagree, it doesn't feel quite the same because you're writing for a publication in that publication's voice. It's reported. What you're doing is shoring up your reporting and just making sure you dotted your I's and crossed your T's. But with a novel, you put your whole heart on those pages. And, reviews can be really hard. I think I never thought that I could read a Goodreads review from a stranger and have it like hurt, but it does,
Yeah.
and I really didn't think that I would have to develop such a thick skin and say, okay, you can't read reviews because you know what? They're just going to make you feel like you shouldn't write. And Jane Austen has really bad reviews on Goodreads too. Um, So I think that was surprising. And I also think that I really thought, and this is very naive, but I really thought novel writing would be a little bit like journalism in the sense that once you got the formula down, you could do it
Mhm.
fast and you could do it easily, and it would be, not as just not as much of a slog, because there are moments where you're really just in your pages and in your characters. But I don't think it's true. And I heard Ellen Hildebrand get interviewed once where she was like, she's on book like, I don't know, 30 something. And she was like, no, it never gets easier. And I was like, thank God, because I really did think by book 3 and 4, it would be something it's a formula. And while it's gotten easier in some ways, I do know that it needs a beginning, a middle, and an end. I do have a certain instinct as to when that's moving too slow. You do learn as you go. Every single time you're starting with a blank page and you're filling pages with words and you don't know how they're going to add up as you go. It really is a question mark. And so the page turner for you is this all going to work, right? Like that's your own page turner. It's like, will this add up to anything? So yeah, I would say those two things.
What's your best advice for aspiring authors?
I might have said this last time. I don't know because I always say this, but I really think you just have to sit and write. I think that, and I know that sounds so basic, but the truth is we make a lot of roadblocks for ourselves. We'll say, "Oh, I'm going to do it next year," or "I don't have time right now." And maybe you really don't, but maybe you have an hour at your
Mhm.
lunch break. Maybe you can get up an hour earlier than you normally do. Like I have a friend who just started getting up at 5, and she writes from 5 to 6:30 before she gets the kids ready for school and then goes to work.
Mhm.
You can find little bits of time, but I would say don't put it off. Like just start brainstorming, start taking notes on paper, make yourself happy, let yourself take a chance, but sit and really do the work. Know that it's not magic, that it's not like musical notes coming out of your fingers. Like, you have to sit and do the real work of writing. The other thing is there was a Washington Post reporter who I went to a journalism conference once where she wrote on a blackboard, because I don't think we had whiteboards then, rewriting is a gift. And that's something I always tell
Mhm.
other writers, that there's not that many professions where you get this many do-overs. And so don't see rewriting as, if someone tells you your book still needs work, don't see it as an insult, see it as this amazing gift that you can go back in and make it better. So I think those are my two major ones.
Yeah, that's great. Seeing the rewriting as a gift is a really
Yeah.
great way to look at it.
I literally still have that on my pin board in my office. Like I have it next to me because I love that statement. It's so true.
Yeah.
And I also love revision. So it's like, yes, it's a gift. If I could just get to revision, then I'm there.
Yes. We have a traditional last question on the
Yeah.
podcast, and it is when our Last Vineyard Summer is turned into a movie or series, what
Ooh.
do you think the theme song should be?
Oh, the theme song. I thought you were going to ask me about actors and actresses. That's great. Okay. Theme song. Oh, it's hard because it is a book that takes place in a time where I should definitely pick a song from that era. But there was this Benson Boone song that I listened to a lot when I was writing this book. And is it Ghost Town? I think it's called. And it's all about kind of finding love with someone and then tearing it all down. That's the chorus. And I listened to it a lot because I felt like in this book, in many ways, that's what I was doing. I was building this loving, connected family and
Mhm.
then tearing it all down. And so it's just this very emotional song. And I would feel so upset about what was happening in this family's life. But I knew that in this like emotional tone of this song that it was going to make them all better for it in the end. So
Yes,
even though that's a contemporary song and it may not work perfectly in this era, that's the song I'm going to say because
that's great.
it fits the book really well.
Brooke Lea Foster, thank you so much for coming on again to
Yay!
chat. It's been really, really great getting to talk to you.
Same. It was so good to see you. And I can't wait to read your book.
Ah, thank
Keep
you. Me
telling
too.
it. Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on Literary Prospects. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.